Secretary of the International Hermeneutic Society, the IHS, whose constitution was written by Eugene Halliday and whose work it is inspired by. Derek first came into contact with Eugene's work 39 years ago when he first visited Tanigard Hall, the retreat and study centre set up by Ken Ratcliffe, who was taught by Eugene. As he recently commented, nobody is more surprised than me to find myself living at Tanigard Hall as its acting resident custodian. The Lord truly does move in mysterious ways. Over to you, Derek.
I don't know if this is on. Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Right, well, the great thing about my presentation is that the work's already done. I don't actually have to say very much, so it's just a question of introducing the film, and then I've been given a little bit of time at the end to give a short, if you like, analysis of some of the elements that went into the film, that some of the processes I was thinking about in terms of Eugene's work. So, Eugene Halliday, first came across him through Ken Ratcliffe 40 years ago, and was completely baffled. Completely and utterly baffled. Was this a madman, or was it a genius? Was it just that I was too thick to understand it? Well, I think we all know the answer to that one. So it's always been a problem for me that I find it very difficult to understand. And the nature of the absolute, I suppose, is such that it always helps the willing, the willing learner. So I found through my own work as a filmmaker, and I took quite a lot of inspiration from David Marlowe in this respect, in that what I always admired David for was really living in the same house, living in the shadow of the great man himself. What David seemed to me to do was to basically take those ideas and interpret them and make them his own in respect of his own field of work. And I've certainly taken that as an inspiration. So in terms of the way I look at the work, use the work, and teach the work, in terms of the stuff that I perhaps do at Tanigard from time to time, I do it very much through the medium of filmmaking, which is my art, if you like. So my experience of really making films is that there's always they're actually meditations, and I look at this kind of quotation from Eugene. It's the mental process, where we discover progressively the meaning of our central thought. And obviously we start by doing the definitions as we know, and we compare ideas and similarities and differences and bring those together into some kind of meaningful pattern. And so the process of making this film, right, is a meditation in that sense for me. That's how I've worked with the stuff. So through making the film, I'm actually learning something about Eugene's work that I don't understand, but through working through it, I'm coming to some kind of revelation. And in that sense, it's let work. It's it's a process of inventing. It's basically accepting that the film already exists in eternity. And my job is to really kind of find a way of letting it into the time process. And it's really kind of very useful to me because I'm not as diligent a scholar as I should be. I always seem to be busy with something else, and I don't really spend the time, or as much time as I tell myself I'd like to, actually studying Eugene's work, although I do and have spent quite a bit of time over the years. So I think that's about all I really want to say, other than to just remind you of what a film actually is, and offer you a definition of the film that's probably most appropriate for today. And that is basically events on a screen that affect the heart and the mind of the viewer. Okay, so if you can take it as that, and we're going to ask them to put the lights off. We're going to turn the audio up loud, hopefully not too loud. If you fall asleep, that's fine. If you find yourself going into some kind of meditative state or trance, that's fine. There's an awful lot going on here, particularly with the audio. And if you let it, it will take you places. Okay? So, we'll leave it up to you. See what happens. It still gets me every time I see that film. Gosh. Yeah. Sorry, it gets me every time, and I always think, gosh. If you actually analyse that from a filmmaking point of view, yes, it's complete and utter nonsense. It's complete and utter nonsense that you could.
Not doing very well. It's dark.
Okay. Do you want me to? Okay. You know, in terms of lots of things like the structure and the way it's all done, you would never make a film like that normally. But okay, so I'm just going to pick on a couple of things very quickly with the time we've got. I think I've got about 5 or 6 minutes. Am I absolutely okay? So I'm going to steam through this. Really, one of the main things that the film is working with is the three-part B in terms of the approach to the storytelling. So if you think of the journey itself as the drive north through the mountains in winter, you know, and Wallace constantly talks about the drive to get there, and obviously we're putting the drive in the belly. Okay? It's a story about identity, id, entity. The id is the primitive and instinctive part of the mind that contains sexual and aggressive drives and hidden memories. There's a story about slavery, fight for freedom. And Wallace talks about the emotional truth. All that dressing up is about evoking the emotional truth, getting beyond the analytic processes that we tend to approach history with, going back into the oral tradition. That handed down, and let's not forget that we've been taught in the oral tradition. We're very much part of that oral tradition, certainly you know, under Don Lord, under Ken Ratcliffe. You know, certainly we at Tennegut regard ourselves very much as having taught in that oral tradition. And there's one quote I'd like to give from Wallace, which I really liked in respect of all of those pronouncements he was making on freedom. And he talks at one point about freedom represents people's right to be who they are, what they believe in, their own gods within a community. I found that a wonderfully kind of insightful thing. So obviously we're placing the slavery story, if you like, in the heart, along with the ego, as we heard from speakers earlier today. It's the realistic part that mediates between the desires of the id and the superego, we're placing in the head. The superego in the head operates as the moral conscience. So if you think about this is a struggle to rediscover a destroyed identity. It's a remembering. There's a resonance in that, in the whole process of the awakening consciousness. How did we get here? Where do we go? What's the way forward? And if you actually look at the structure of the film is basically structured that way. It starts, we're in the middle of the night, in a camper van, in the middle of the wilderness, wondering, what the hell I'm doing here? How did I get here? Okay. And it's a process of rediscovering. And the film is set within the landscape. The body of the film is set within the landscape. It's a journey within a landscape. And ultimately, I'm eaten by the landscape. I'm consumed by the landscape as the protagonist in the film. So what is consuming me? Well, it's the telluric forces acting on me. What are the telluric forces? Well, they are the phenomenon observed in the Earth's crust and mantle. A telluric current comes from the Latin tellus, meaning earth. So it's an earth current. It's an electric current which moves underground or through the sea. Telluric currents result from both natural causes and human activity. And the discrete currents interact in complex patterns. The currents are extremely low frequency and travel over large areas at or near the surface of the Earth. Telluric methods are used for exploring the structure beneath the Earth's surface, such as in industrial prospecting for minerals. Telluric currents were used for telegraphic systems as far back as the 1840s. They're not new. The knowledge of them is not new. But I found this interesting quote from Astrology and the Raising of Kundalini by Barbara Hand Clow. And she says, although telluric forces, such as the magnetic force of underground springs, ley lines, sacred places and stones, is not officially recognized by conventional science, in sacred site research, telluric energy is another subtle energetic force that is real and can be felt. According to those who investigate telluric forces, Jonathan Colin Board, Louis Spencer, Francis Hitchin, and John Mitchell, and others, the Earth has power points that correspond to human acupuncture points, and that both can be needled to activate energy flow. Acupuncture aligns the body with the telluric forces, I'm still quoting. The natural electric currents flowing near the Earth's surface, allowing energy to move through the blocked chakras more easily. When ceremony, or even simple meditation, is done at a sacred site, such as Mayan temples or megalithic sites in the Aegean or the British Isles, its activity needles those power points, and the earth energy flows in response. James Swan, in his book Sacred Places, says, according to tradition, cultural wisdom, sacred places in nature are unique because they have a power which can more readily move up into spiritual consciousness. Places like Tanagath Hall, or should I say Tanyurgath Hall, which is the correct pronunciation. So, for my own part, I've decided that Dwilikia Tanyurgath Hall, meaning I like Tanagath Hall and recommend you do too. Thank you.